Hello, my name is Elizabeth Baines and I'm responsible for monitoring and developing the EFA funding formula for 16 to 19-year-olds. Together with Colin Stronach, who is responsible for the allocations process, we will be presenting this funding update for the 2016 to 17 academic year. We will cover details of how we have been reviewing delivery since 2013 to 14 academic year, some minor changes to the funding formula for the 2016 to 17 academic year, the allocations timeline, the data sources we will use, the business case process you will need to follow if there are special circumstances or infrastructure changes, and changes to student support funding. Throughout the presentation, we will use the term institution to refer to all schools, all types of academies, further education and sixth form colleges, and charitable and commercial providers, unless there is something relating to a specific institution type, in which case we will state that clearly. This is an update. If you are new to 16 to 19 funding, then you might benefit from watching our introductory video. The link is at the end of the presentation. 2013 to 14 saw a significant change to the funding formula when we moved from funding by qualification to funding per student. There have been minor changes in subsequent years, and for 2016 to 17, there will again only be a small number of further changes to ensure stability. From a full review of data returns for 2013 to 14, we are pleased to see that the sector is reacting positively to the move to funding per student, and we are starting to see changes in delivery in line with the recommendations made by Professor Alison Wolfe in the review of vocational education. For example, the data shows there has been an increase in the proportion of students in the full-time band of over 540 hours and a decrease in the proportion of students in the smallest part-time band. Students are studying more substantial qualifications as there has been a decrease in the number of aims studied by students and an increase in the average number of hours for each aim. The data also shows that there has been an increase in both English and Maths GCSEs and stepping stone qualification enrolments. However, in a small number of institutions, we have identified what appears to be non-standard delivery of study programmes. There could be a number of reasons for this, as we do expect a range of delivery patterns. So we're conducting an exercise to understand the reasons for delivery patterns that are outliers compared to the majority of study programmes. For each institution where apparent non-standard delivery has been identified, we have provided a report and require a response to explain the delivery pattern. We are now reviewing the responses. The 16 to 19 participation budget funds institutions to deliver high-quality study programmes offering substantial qualifications, English and Maths, and other value-added activities, including work experience, enabling students to progress to higher levels of study or skilled work. The spending review settlement provides a stable medium-term framework for institutions to plan how they will deliver a sustainable, high-quality offer for students. In particular, the base rate of $4,000 for full-time 16 to 17-year-olds will be maintained over the spending review period. Formula protection funding, introduced in 2013 to 14, will be phased out from 2016 to 17 over a period of 6 years. I will describe how this will be implemented for 2016 to 17. In academic year 2014 to 15, we introduced additional funding for free meals for post-16 students attending colleges and other FE providers, to provide parity with those young people attending school sixth forms. This introduced some overlap between this new funding and discretionary bursaries. Therefore, for 2016 to 17, we will remove the ring fence between the free meals allocation and the discretionary bursaries allocation, which will maximise flexibility for institutions receiving both allocations. The requirement to provide free meals for all eligible students who request them remains. On traineeships, from the end of this January, the government has removed the restriction that only providers graded good or outstanding by Ofsted can deliver traineeships. This fulfills a commitment to review the criteria once traineeships were fully established. In terms of Ofsted grades, traineeships will now be treated the same way as other study programmes. This change will be implemented within existing allocations. The weighting for specialist land-based provision will be increased to 1.75 and the Prince's Trust Team Programme to 1.2. Block 1 of the disadvantaged funding will be calculated based on the Index of Multiple Deprivation 2015, now this is available. Previously, this used the same index from 2010. The requirement that students without a grade C in Maths and English must continue to study these subjects was introduced from 2013 to 14. The 2016 to 17 academic year allocations will be the first year of implementation of the condition of funding. I will describe how reductions in funding will be applied next. For the current academic year 2015 to 16, the condition of funding continues to apply, with the additional requirement that full-time students with a grade D GCSE in either subject must study a GCSE rather than a stepping stone qualification. The limited exemptions for those either unable to benefit from English and Maths or with an overseas equivalent qualification detailed in the guidance on gov.uk at the link at the end of this presentation still applies. We have previously communicated that funding for students not studying either Maths or English GCSE when they had not achieved a grade C would be removed, commencing from 2016 to 17 using 2014 to 15 data. Because the sector has responded so well to this challenge, ministers have decided not to apply the condition in full for 2016 to 17. This is for 1 year only. Funding reductions in 2016 to 17 will only apply to institutions where more than 5% of students without A star to C GCSE in English and or Maths did not enrol on an approved qualification in these subjects. In addition, funding reductions for these institutions will be made at half the national funding rate above the tolerance, rather than 100% as originally planned. The tolerance will be calculated by determining the value of non-compliant students in 2014 to 15 based on the national rate by individual student band as a percentage of funding for all students in 2014 to 15 on the same basis. For non-compliant students above the tolerance only, we will remove funding at a reduced rate of 50% of the national funding rate for the band. I'll now work through an example where funding would be removed due to non-compliance in 2014 to 15. The detail that appears in this example will be included in the funding statement. The first stage of the calculation is to determine the number of students who did not meet the condition of funding, illustrated here by the red lines. To calculate the value of non-compliance, the number of non-compliant students from end year 2014 to 15 data will be multiplied by the appropriate national funding rate according to their total planned hours. Values for students in the 0 to 279 band will be calculated as a proportion of the full-time national rate based on their total planned hours divided by 600. The value for the non-compliant students is the base funding rate and does not include any uplifts, for example, for disadvantage or programme cost weightings. The value of non-compliant students is £676,098. The next stage is to calculate the value of the total number of students in 2014 to 15, again using the 2016 to 17 rate. In this example, the value is £8,266,920. 5% of total student funding is £413,346. This value of non-compliance is greater than the 5% value, so there will be a reduction in funding. The difference is £262,752. Therefore, at 50%, the reduction will be £131,376. Ministers also require all institutions not fully compliant in the 2014 to 15 academic year to have a plan in place to achieve full compliance in 2015 to 16. Institutions that were not fully compliant in 2014 to 15 have been asked to complete an online survey confirming they have a plan in place. We set the deadline for completion of the survey at the 30th of November and are now following up with those institutions that the 2014 to 15 data shows were not compliant. The impact of this calculation is that around 150 institutions completing the ILR will have approximately 5 million removed from the 2016 to 17 allocations, and we anticipate that a similar figure will be removed from schools and academies. Further details, including the example, are in the revised Maths and English guidance on gov.uk. I will now explain how Formula Protection Funding, or FPF, will be treated for 2016 to 17. FPF was introduced for 2013 to 14 to provide protection to institutions where the move to study programmes and funding per student may have resulted in significant reduction in funding. FPF was originally guaranteed for 3 years, up to and including 2015 to 16. From 2016 to 17, FPF will continue to be paid, but will start to be reduced over 6 years, with the final payment of FPF in 2020 to 21. I can explain how FPF will apply for 2016 to 17. The precise detail for following years are still to be confirmed. We estimate that for the majority of institutions, the first year of removing FPF will be cost neutral. Some institutions might receive a small increase overall due to large programme uplift or movement in other factors of the formula. For 2016 to 17, the level of FPF will be calculated by determining the difference between programme funding per student in 2016 to 17 and programme funding plus FPF per student in 2015 to 16, limited by the 2015 to 16 level of students. As FPF will be paid per student, the number of students that attract any FPF could be lower where the number of students in 2016 to 17 is lower than 2015 to 16, but the number of students that attract FPF can never be higher. By programme funding, we mean the funding calculated by the formula, excluding additional elements in the allocation, for example, discretionary bursary funding. Once the value of FPF is determined, the reduction for 2016 to 17 will be the higher of 1/6 of FPF, or 2% of total programme funding plus FPF. This means that if FPF is less than 2% of total programme funding plus FPF, it is removed in full in 2016 to 2017. If FPF is between 2% and 12% of total programme funding plus FPF, it is reduced by 2% of total programme funding plus FPF. If FPF is more than 12% of the total programme funding plus FPF, it is reduced by 1/6, that is 16.67%. Detailed guidance is on gov.uk. This includes examples for how the reduction will be implemented for the different possibilities. The government has removed the restriction that only providers graded good or outstanding by Ofsted could deliver traineeships. This fulfills a commitment to review the criteria once traineeships were fully established. In terms of Ofsted grades, traineeships will be treated the same way as other study programmes. We will continue to ensure that funding supports institutions growing traineeship numbers and will in March 2016 review the position as part of our exceptional growth process based on RO6 data received in February. If you do have exceptional growth in traineeships in academic year 2015-16, please raise this with us during February. Sixth forms that wish to deliver traineeships can now record these through a new indicator on the census. I will now pass over to Colin.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm now going to give you some more detail on the allocations process and timeline for 2016-17. So, starting with the timeline for the allocations process. This first slide sets out the key dates in January and February. The first thing to mention is the annual funding letter. This is the letter sent out earlier this month from Peter Mucklow, the EFA Director for Young People, that set out the main points relating to post-16 funding for the coming year. The letter is available on our website as a primary source of information for all institutions involved with post-16 funding. Also in January, we are sending out information on lagged student numbers and funding factors to give you early information on the values we expect to use to calculate your allocation. Along with this, where possible, we provide supporting information that shows how we've used your data to calculate those funding factors. During February, we will then send out allocations to the majority of institutions. Exceptions to this timing are those FE institutions where the allocations are based on RO6 data submitted in February, some higher education institutions, and a small number of other more complex cases. In those cases, allocations are likely to be sent out in March. Once you've received your allocation, we expect that for most institutions that will be final. However, if there are significant issues with the data you returned to us that affect your allocation, you'll have an opportunity to send in a business case. We'll confirm the deadline for business cases when we send you your allocation, but currently we expect that deadline to be the 8th of April for most institutions. We'll then review business cases during April and May, and we expect to confirm the outcomes by early June. I'll say more about the process for handling business cases shortly. Moving on now to the data we'll use to calculate your allocations, starting with schools and academies. The main data that we use for your allocations is based on the autumn 2015 census. This gives us data for two groups of students. Firstly, we'll use the data you return in the census for students enrolled this year, 15-16, as the basis for your lagged student numbers for next year. And secondly, we'll use the data for those students enrolled last year, 14-15, to determine the main funding factors, size of programme, cost weighting and so on, that we use to calculate your funding allocation. This information is also used to calculate any impact of the new condition of funding. As Elizabeth mentioned earlier, this year we're using new data from the updated 2015 version of the Index of Multiple Deprivation to calculate your Block 1 disadvantage factor. For two of the factors, we use matched data that includes information on achievements as well as participation. Those factors are Disadvantage Block 2, that is, the funding based on the number of students without a GCSE Grade C in English or Maths, and for large programmes. I'll say more about funding for large programmes shortly. For FE institutions then, the data sources are set out on this slide. In most cases, your lagged student numbers will be based on the ILR RO4 return from December. We will then use data on in-year recruitment patterns from last year to give the expected number of students for the whole year. For those commercial and charitable providers where there's significant in-year recruitment, we'll use data for the rolling 12-month period, February 2015 to January 2016. And for some institutions, we'll use whole year data for 2014-15 instead. The detail of these approaches will be set out in your allocation statement. We will also review the FE data received in RO4 against the RO6 return received in February. Where there's a significant increase or decrease in student numbers, we may then revise the allocation accordingly. For these institutions, it's likely that the allocation will be made in early March. As for schools, we'll then use data from 14-15 to determine the funding factors that we use to calculate your allocation. This will include the use of the updated IMD 2015 data to calculate the Block 1 disadvantage factors. And again, as for schools, we'll use match data to determine the amount of funding for large programmes and for Block 2 disadvantage. Now, moving on to one area which is new for 2016-17, additional funding for large programmes. This year, institutions will get an uplift of 10 or 20% to reflect the number of students who achieve specified large programmes with high grades. For example, 4 A-levels all at grade B or above. The full details of the programmes that are eligible for this funding and the grades required are published on our website. As I mentioned earlier, this funding is based on matched achievement data from 13-14. Institutions eligible for this funding have already been informed of this during the autumn and had a chance to check the figures. We'll confirm the number of eligible students and the related funding in your allocation in February or March. This slide shows how the large programmes calculation fits into the funding formula. The number of students in each of the 2 bands is multiplied by the rate for that band, and the total amount from this calculation is then added into the overall allocation. An important point to note is that because the numbers eligible are based on achievements at the end of 2-year programmes, the amount of funding you receive for each student who achieves the required level is effectively doubled. So, looking at the example shown here, this institution has 15 students who achieved 4 A-levels at grade B or above in 13-14 and so are eligible for the 10% rate. The institution would receive £400 per student per year, £800 per student in total, so that is £12,000 to be added to the 16-17 allocation. This institution also has 10 students eligible for the 20% rate. In that case, they receive £800 per student per year, giving £16,000 in total, and so overall they'd receive £28,000 in additional funding for large programmes. Moving on now to some other key elements of the allocations process. Firstly, business cases. As in past years, the default position is that we use the data you return to us to calculate your allocation, but by exception we will consider business cases where there's been a major error in the data. As last year, we are confirming in advance the thresholds that will apply to most business cases. For cases involving lagged student numbers, the threshold is the lower of 5% or 50 students. For cases involving the full-time part-time split or other funding factors, the lower of 5% of funding or £250,000. For any other cases, we've not set a threshold in advance and we'll decide whether any threshold will apply when we've seen the range of cases. For 2016-17 allocations only, there is one exception to this. We will not apply the standard thresholds to any cases related to planned hours data from the autumn 2014 school census. This reflects the unusual nature of that particular return, where it was used to collect planned hours data for 2 separate years, and so could otherwise have a material impact on 2 years' allocations. It's important to note that these thresholds purely determine whether we will consider a case or not. We will then decide whether to agree the case based on the evidence provided. I'm now going to talk about a couple of specific issues that will affect only a proportion of institutions. Firstly, new sixth forms. Ministers decided last year that proposals from schools or academies for new sixth forms should only be considered if the institution has been assessed as good or outstanding by Ofsted. This now forms part of the criteria applied by local authorities and regional schools commissioners in their decision making. Once a sixth form has been approved, the numbers funded will follow a standard approach as the institution builds up its numbers. In year 1, we will normally fund a new sixth form based on 1/3 of its overall planned capacity. In year 2, we will then fund that sixth form for twice the number actually recruited in year 1. And then in year 3, we will fund them based on the lagged approach. Our experience is that this standard approach matches the profile of recruitment for most new sixth forms. However, some plan to build up more quickly and others more slowly, so we will consider well-evidenced business cases for a different profile on an exceptional basis. Secondly, subcontracting. We're reviewing the rules for subcontracting for 2016-17 and will issue revised guidance as soon as possible. A reminder of the approach for 15-16 though. We expect distance subcontracting only to occur by exception. If you're intending to deliver any distance subcontracting, you will need to have a clear rationale as to why that provision is exceptional and so should receive EFA funding. We also expect institutions and your governing bodies to assure yourselves that you're compliant with the subcontracting controls guidance and our other funding guidance. We're monitoring the levels of subcontracting through data returns, and auditors will be checking to ensure that provision is compliant. Now, moving on to student support funding. In 2014-15, we introduced additional funding for free meals for post-16 students attending colleges and other FE providers. Prior to that year, colleges and FE providers have been supporting some of the cost of meals for students who needed them on a discretionary basis from the Discretionary Bursary Fund. Based on an external evaluation, we estimate this represented over 15 million of spend annually. Provision of FE free meals is now established, and so in 16-17 we'll be removing 15 million from the Discretionary Bursary budget in respect of this double funding. This will only affect those institutions, mainly in FE, that receive both discretionary bursary and free meals funding in their post-16 allocation. Along with this change, we will also remove the ring fence between the free meals and discretionary bursary allocations to maximise flexibility for institutions. The requirement to promote and provide free meals for all eligible students who request them remains. We plan to allocate free meals funding to FE institutions for 16-17 based on data from RO4 on the number of students they have assessed as eligible for and in receipt of free meals in 15-16. No change is planned to the £2.41 rate for free meals. Before I finish, I want to say a few words on other student support funding. Vulnerable bursaries and Care to Learn are now being managed through the new Student Bursary Support Service, launched last summer, operated by Capita on our behalf. The rules for eligibility for funding for those schemes remain unchanged. There are no significant changes to other student support schemes for the coming year either. Finally then, how to find out more if you have further queries. Firstly, there's a large amount of information online on our website. We have put links to some individual elements throughout this presentation, and this slide lists some more general sources of information that you may find useful. If you can't find what you want through one of those links, then the search function on gov.uk may well help you find the right information. Our e-bulletins are also an important source of information, and we use those to highlight key publications, as well as letting you know when we issue specific documents related to allocations. The e-bulletin is issued weekly at most times of year, and we'd encourage you to subscribe to ensure you receive the most up-to-date information. Finally, if you have any queries that can't be resolved through these routes, then please do contact us directly. This slide has a link to the online form you can use to send a query through to our inquiry service. Thank you for watching, and we hope you found this helpful. Goodbye.
Goodbye.